Hi, and welcome to Uncle Scott's Kitchen. Today we're going to take a look at Clark's cast iron soap and seasoning oil and see if it does a good job cleaning and maintaining some carbon steel and cast iron skillets and pans. Let's get started. Okay, I'm always on the lookout for new, better, different ways to season, clean, maintain my carbon steel and cast iron. Well, I was researching online the other day and ran across these Clark's products. Cast iron soap and seasoning oil. Now, I've never tried them before. I got on Amazon, I ordered them. The soap was about $15 for 12 ounces and the cast iron oil about $14 for the same size. So roughly about $30 worth of products here. Paid for them with my own money. I think that keeps my reviews a little more genuine and unbiased, hopefully. So I got these in the other day. I have not tried them yet, but we're going to do that today. Now what I did is convince my wife to let me build up some dirty dishes in the kitchen and go a few days without washing them, without cleaning the kitchen. Normally we keep a pretty darn clean kitchen around here and I maintain my pans immediately. But for this review I wanted a stack of dirty pans. So in this one here we've got leftover taco meat, browned some beef, made taco meat in there. My wife cooked some pancakes in that one. Carbon steel, cooked some bacon in this one, seared some big steaks in this one. That's steak gunk that's been there for about 3 days. And good old bacon and cast iron. Bacon is one of the worst offenders as far as leaving gunk on the bottom of a pan. So we're really going to put the soap through the test, see if we can get all this gunk out of these pans. Now one thing I want to note is I could use some Dawn Ultra or some sort of really powerful grease cutting soap and definitely get all this stuff out of the pans, but I'm afraid that would damage my seasoning. So when we look at the cast iron soap today, I want to see if it gets all the gunk out of the pans, but I also want to make sure that it doesn't just nuke the heck out of the seasoning. I don't want it to strip the seasoning off of there. I don't want to have to do a whole lot of maintenance after using the soap. Now the seasoning oil is a food grade coconut oil. One thing I like about it, it says that it does not need to be refrigerated and will never go rancid. So I like hearing that right off the bat. An interesting note on the seasoning oil. When I got on the Clark's website and read some of the more in-depth directions, they say that after you wash and dry your pan to just apply the oil and you don't need to use any heat. You don't need to season your pan in your oven. So I'm going to be really interested to see if that works. I also noticed on their website that their directions are more for cast iron, but the products say they work for carbon steel as well. So I'm really going to be interested to see if we can season carbon steel without using any heat. I'm a little bit skeptical about that, but we'll see. Now around here we kind of go a little crazy for our carbon steel skillets and pans and our cast iron. And these are specialty products, so I don't mind paying up a little bit for them. But still, this is about $30 worth of stuff. And for $30 you can get a ton of Dawn and Crisco. So we're going to need to look at the value as well. Is the value there in addition to performance? Now I'm ready to put my graduate degree to use and start washing some dishes. Okay, so I ended up washing a bunch of skillets and pans. Here's some of the highlights. I can also use this as part of a video resume should I ever need to apply at Denny's. So the soap did a pretty good job of getting all these pans clean. I never really had to nuke anything too terribly harshly. The only thing I had to do was get the chainmail scrubber out for that taco meat that had been sitting in the pan for a couple of days. Other than that, pretty much everything else washed right out with a sponge, some paper towels, and just scraping out some grease before I even started. Now on one of my carbon steels, after washing it with the Clark's, I thought maybe the seasoning looked just a skosh lighter than when I started. So I wanted to kind of drill down on that a little bit more. So I took another carbon steel skillet, this one a 9.5 inch Matfer I've been using a bunch lately. And what I did was rewash it 4 or 5 more times with the Clark's, except for I only washed half the pan. Rinsed it out, dried it out, got a drop or two of oil on there, and I can't tell any difference between the two halves of the pan. I can't tell any difference in the side that was washed with the Clark's and one that was not washed as far as the seasoning goes. So I think the Clark's is going to be just fine on carbon steel seasoning. I didn't see any of my seasoning stripped off or nuked, so that's what I was looking for there. And it did a very good job on cleaning the cast iron. That's what you're looking for in a cast iron soap. My only caveat on the cast iron soap is that when you use it, you kind of get a little hint, a scent of kind of like a bathroom soap, like an ivory soap, which is a clean smell, but I associate that with a shower or a clean bathroom, whereas say that Karen and Doucette cast iron soap, it has a hint of citrus to it, and I associate that a little bit more with a clean kitchen rather than like a shower. So that's kind of a first world complaint, but as far as cleaning power, the Clark's did a very good job of getting the grease and gunk out of these pans. So I like the Clark's soap. Now, moving on to the seasoning oil. How'd the seasoning oil do? Here's where things started to go a little bit more sideways. Now we got the pans cleaned and dried, and we used the Clark's oil just like the directions said, put a few drops on each pan, wiped it out, wiped it all around the pan, wiped out the excess. Everything was fine at this point. Now all this is a means to an end of getting our pans ready to cook some delicious food. So I started cooking in my cast iron skillet. I went with some fried okra. When I put it on the burner, I noticed that I got a little bit of a scent of something burning. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe I didn't wipe off the bottom of the pan very well. Maybe some of that protective oil is just burning off. So I cooked the okra. I cleaned the pan, dried it, wiped it out, put the seasoning oil in again, decided to cook an egg. As I was bringing the pan up to heat, I noticed that it really started smoking. Now when I cook the okra, I was heating the oil along with the pan. When I cook an egg, I heat the pan first, then in goes the butter later. And what I noticed here is that as I brought the pan up to temperature, very quickly it started to smoke, very surprisingly quickly. So I thought the pan was just screaming hot at this point, probably too hot for my egg. I put the butter in anyway, and oddly the butter reacted as if the pan was not hot enough. So that seemed very strange. Now the egg cooked okay. I had to lift it a little bit with the spatula, but not that big a deal. It slid around okay. But that got me to thinking, because I could still smell that little bit of a burning smell. So what I did was take some of the other pans, the ones that had been washed, cleaned, and wiped down with that protective oil, and just brought them up to temperature just to see what would happen. Well, lo and behold, I took some readings with my E-Tech City temperature gun, and it turns out that those couple of drops of protective oil, that oil starts smoking at about 250 degrees, and up around 300, it just goes crazy, and then on from there. So what I think is going on here is those couple of drops of protective oil, they're not really bonding, they're not really soaking in, they're not really forming a seasoning. They're just kind of remaining as liquid oil on the surface of these pans. Now, even though I dry these pans out, there's still a microscopic layer of that oil on there. And when these pans are brought up to heat, it starts to smoke. And it starts to smoke at a very low temperature. I decided to try a stovetop maintenance seasoning with some of the oil on one of my carbon steels. This thing started smoking after about a minute. When it got to 250 degrees, from 250 up to 300, it was smoking, and then from 300 on up to 350, just smoking like a factory. And for a moment here, I can kind of empathize with my wife when she tries to boil water. But this stuff smokes well before normal cooking temperatures. Normally when you're frying, it's going to be 340, 50, 60, 375 degrees. This pan is going to smoke profusely before that. Now what I think is going on is that these carbon steel pans have a very hard surface. I don't think that little drop or two of protective oil is soaking down in there at all. I think it's remaining on the surface. And because we're not using any heat with it, we're not really forming a more normal, traditional type of seasoning on the pan. I think that oil is just remaining on there. And even though it's just a microscopic film, once it gets up to heat, it's going to start burning off. You can see the smoke. You can definitely smell it in your house, and I don't like that at all. Now I wanted to check into this a little bit further. So what I did was take one of my cast iron skillets, the one I cooked the okra and the eggs in. I cleaned it, dried it, oiled it, and left it overnight, thinking, well, maybe that oil will kind of soak down into the metal a little bit. Maybe it'll harden overnight, maybe evaporate off a little bit. Brought the pan up to heat the next morning and got the same results. Still smoking. I decided to go ahead and do some oven seasoning as well, just to see what would happen. I took my trusty Lodge 12-inch cast iron, and what I did was just bring out the boring old Crisco, same stuff my mom and grandmother used for well over half a century. I seasoned the right half of the pan with the boring old Crisco. I seasoned the left half of the pan with the Clarks. I also decided to season my Matford carbon steel, wiped it down really well with the Clarks, put them both in the oven, and after 20 minutes, look at this. Holy cow, I think I need one of those COVID masks for my own kitchen. Way too much smoking. I'm lucky I didn't set off the fire alarm. Really stunk up the house, had to open the windows. Now as far as the results, after I got the pans out later, I couldn't really tell if anything had happened at all on the Matford. Now on the cast iron, look at this. There's a clear demarcation line down the middle of the pan where you can see the Crisco on the right and the Clarks on the left. The Crisco is forming a more traditional, what we might expect to see when we do a seasoning on a pan. The Clarks, I can't really tell if anything has happened. I decided to redo this a couple more times, and when I would wipe the Crisco on the pan with a paper towel, note that the paper towel came up clean, no gunk on there. When I would wipe the Clark side down with a paper towel and more of that seasoning oil, gunk was coming off the pan. You can see it on the paper towel. What I think is happening here is that Clark's oil just can't handle the heat. I think when it gets in the oven, especially at seasoning temperatures, I think it's burning off, and that may be some ash or whatever, but I don't want that in my food. I don't think it can handle the oven type temperatures. Now that's at seasoning temperatures, but many people will preheat a carbon steel skillet in their oven if they're going to sear a steak on their stovetop. If I make my mom's cornbread recipe, I have to preheat the pan in the oven 450 degrees until it's up to temperature. If you do that with this Clark seasoning oil in the pan, I think the oil is going to first smoke and then it's going to burn off, and that's not good. Okay, the Clark's cast iron soap. It did a really good job at cleaning cast iron and carbon steel without nuking the seasoning. That's the most important thing. I thought it was just a little bit pricey at $15, but not crazy out of whack. And I personally didn't care for the scent that much. But with those two minor caveats, I thought it did a great job at cleaning the skillets and pans. That's the most important thing. And I give the Clark's cast iron soap a thumbs up. And unfortunately for the seasoning oil, I hate to be a negative Nelly, but I'm going to give it a thumbs down. It is not the seasoning product for me. On the pans and skillets I tried it on, they all smoked and stunk up the room when I brought them up to temperature to cook food in them. That is not a good thing. Also in the oven, I would be hesitant to use this seasoning oil on a carbon steel or cast iron pan that was going to go in the oven, whether for preheating, for cornbread, or to sear a steak on the stovetop later. It seemed to just burn off and leave a little bit of gunk on the pan. Didn't really produce that traditional hard, shiny black seasoning that we're all used to. The Crisco did a better job. The Clark's at $15, $14, not a very good bargain when it doesn't work as well as $3 or $4 Crisco. Sorry to say. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the old channel. If you didn't enjoy the video, please subscribe anyway. It's also very important to turn those notifications on, because just because you subscribe to the channel doesn't mean they're going to show you my videos when the new ones are out. If you want to make sure you see them, make sure your notifications are on. Leave your questions and comments below. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time on Uncle Scott's Kitchen.